The morning sun cast a golden glow over Kensington Palace as the royal household prepared for one of the most significant days in recent memory. Inside the elegant residence, Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood before a tall mirror in her dressing room, her hands smoothing down the fabric of her carefully chosen outfit. The deep blue color was rich and dignified, perfect for the solemn occasion that awaited them at Westminster Abbey. In the adjoining rooms, the sounds of childhood filled the usually quiet corridors. Prince George, now a young man of growing responsibility, was adjusting his tie with the help of his valet. His movements were careful and deliberate, showing the maturity that had developed in him over the years. The weight of being second in line to the throne was something he had learned to carry with grace. Much like his father before him, Princess Charlotte was in her room, standing perfectly still as her hair was arranged into an elegant style. Her dress, a beautiful shade of cream with delicate embroidery, had been selected weeks in advance. She looked every bit the young princess she was, but her eyes sparkled with the same mischievous spirit she had shown since childhood. She caught her reflection in the mirror and smiled, practicing the composed expression she knew would be photographed countless times throughout the day. Down the hallway, Prince Louis was experiencing his own morning routine. The youngest of the three children had grown considerably, but he still maintained that infectious energy that had charmed the public since his first royal appearances. His small suit had been tailored perfectly, and though he fidgeted slightly as his mother came to check on him, there was an understanding in his eyes that today was special. William, Prince of Wales, moved through the palace with quiet determination. He stopped at each of his children's rooms, offering words of encouragement and gentle reminders about the day ahead. His own morning had begun hours earlier with briefings and final arrangements, but his priority remained his family. He knew that the eyes of the world would be upon them, but more importantly, he wanted his children to understand the significance of the moment they were about to be part of. The preparation had taken weeks of careful planning. Catherine had worked closely with her team to ensure that every detail was considered, from the children's comfort to the symbolic meaning of their presence. She understood better than most how these moments would be remembered, how photographs would be studied and stories would be told for generations to come. But beyond the pageantry, she was simply a mother wanting to guide her children through an important family occasion. As the designated departure time approached, the family gathered in one of the palace's grand reception rooms. The children stood together, and for a moment, Catherine and William simply looked at them with pride. George stood tall and confident. Charlotte radiated elegance and poise, and Louis, despite his youth, showed a remarkable understanding of the moment. They were not just royal children anymore, but young individuals stepping into their roles with increasing awareness. The palace staff moved efficiently around them, making final checks and ensuring everything was in order. Security personnel communicated quietly through their devices, coordinating the departure sequence. Outside, the convoy of vehicles waited, their engines purring softly in the morning air. The route to Westminster Abbey had been carefully planned and secured, every intersection and turn accounted for. Catherine knelt down briefly to speak with Louis, her hand gently touching his shoulder. She whispered something that made him smile and nod seriously. It was these small, tender moments that revealed the balance she maintained between being a princess and being a mother. William watched with a soft expression, his love for his family evident in every glance. The call came that it was time to leave. The family moved together toward the palace entrance, their steps synchronized in a way that came from years of walking together at public events. As they emerged into the daylight, the waiting staff bowed respectfully. The children climbed into the vehicle with practiced ease, Charlotte helping Louis with his seatbelt before settling into her own seat. William and Catherine took their positions, exchanging a brief glance that communicated volumes. They had faced many public moments together, but bringing their children to such a significant event added a new dimension of meaning. As the convoy began to move, pulling away from the familiar grounds of Kensington Palace, the city of London spread out before them. The streets had been lined with barriers in preparation for the day's events. Early arrivals among the public were already claiming their spots, hoping for a glimpse of the royal family. Union Jack flags fluttered in the breeze, and there was an atmosphere of anticipation that seemed to pulse through the very air of the city. The convoy moved smoothly through the streets, police motorcycles leading the way. Inside the vehicle, the children gazed out at the crowds beginning to gather. George sat with his hands folded in his lap, his expression thoughtful as he processed the magnitude of the day. Charlotte pointed out certain landmarks to Louis, her voice soft but animated. William and Catherine occasionally exchanged words with their children, keeping the atmosphere calm and reassuring despite the building excitement outside. As they drew closer to Westminster Abbey, the crowds grew thicker. People pressed against the barriers, their phones and cameras raised high. The sight of the royal convoy triggered waves of excitement, with people calling out and waving enthusiastically. The children had seen crowds before, but the scale of this gathering was extraordinary even by royal standards. The ancient spires of Westminster Abbey came into view, rising majestically against the London skyline. The building had witnessed centuries of British history, had hosted coronations, weddings, and state occasions beyond counting. Today, it would once again serve as the backdrop for a moment that would be remembered and cherished. As their vehicle approached the Abbey's entrance, the family prepared themselves for the moment when they would step out into the full gaze of the watching world, ready to captivate hearts with their presence and unity. The royal convoy slowed as it approached the historic entrance of Westminster Abbey, and the atmosphere outside reached a crescendo of excitement. Thousands of people who had waited for hours erupted in cheers, their voices creating a wave of sound that seemed to embrace the entire area. The security team moved into position with precision, their eyes scanning constantly while maintaining an air of calm professionalism. Catherine took a deep breath, her hand instinctively reaching for William's. This simple gesture, caught by cameras and witnessed by the world, would later be described as a moment of genuine human connection amidst the grandeur. William squeezed her hand gently in return, a silent communication of support and partnership that had sustained them through years of public life and private challenges. The vehicle came to a complete stop, and there was a brief moment of stillness before the door was opened by a waiting attendant. William stepped out first, his tall frame emerging into the bright daylight. He turned immediately, extending his hand back into the vehicle to assist Catherine. She emerged with characteristic grace, her outfit catching the light beautifully as she stepped onto the red carpet that had been laid out for their arrival. The crowd's reaction was overwhelming. Cheers mixed with expressions of admiration and affection. People called out their names, declarations of love and support carried on the air. Catherine smiled warmly toward the gathered public, her natural elegance on full display. She had learned over the years how to acknowledge the crowd's enthusiasm while maintaining the dignity expected of her position. Then came the moment that truly captured hearts. George emerged from the vehicle standing tall and composed beyond his years. He paused for just a moment, taking in the scene before him with eyes that showed both awareness and a hint of natural nervousness. William placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder, a father's gesture that transcended royal protocol and spoke to the universal bond between parent and child. Charlotte followed, and the crowd seemed to collectively hold its breath. She stepped onto the carpet with remarkable poise, her young face showing a composure that belied her age. Her dress moved gently in the breeze, and she instinctively reached up to ensure her hair remained perfectly in place. There was something captivating about her presence, a blend of childhood innocence and emerging royal bearing that made people smile and reach for their cameras with renewed enthusiasm. Louis was the last to emerge, and his appearance triggered an audible wave of affection from the crowd. Despite his youth, he managed the moment with surprising confidence, though his eyes were wide as he took in the enormous gathering of people. Catherine immediately moved to his side, her hand gently guiding him while allowing him to maintain his own dignity and independence. The family stood together for a moment at the base of the Abbey steps, a picture of unity and continuity. Photographers' cameras created a constant clicking sound, like a mechanical heartbeat documenting every second of the historic moment. The image they presented was powerful in its simplicity. A family, royal yet relatable, formal yet filled with obvious love and support for one another. William and Catherine exchanged a brief glance with their children, a silent check to ensure everyone was ready. George nodded slightly. Charlotte adjusted her posture, and Louis looked up at his mother with trust in his eyes. Then, as a unit, they began to walk toward the Abbey entrance. Their steps were measured and dignified, yet there was a natural quality to their movement that made them seem accessible, despite the formality of the occasion. The crowd along the barriers strained to get closer, to capture their own photographs and memories of this moment. Many people had tears in their eyes, moved by the sight of the royal family representing both tradition and the future. Elderly spectators who had witnessed generations of royal history nodded approvingly, while younger observers captured everything on their phones, already imagining how they would share this experience with others. As the family climbed the Abbey steps, the children maintained their composure beautifully. George walked with his father's same measured stride, while Charlotte kept her head up and her expression serene. Louis held his mother's hand but walked independently, showing that even at his young age he understood the significance of the moment. Catherine and William flanked their children, protective yet allowing them to shine in their own right. The Abbey officials waited at the entrance, ready to receive the royal family with appropriate ceremony. The ancient doors of Westminster Abbey stood open, revealing the magnificent interior beyond. The sounds from outside the crowd's cheers, the clicking of cameras, the general hum of thousands of gathered people created a backdrop of public emotion that contrasted with the sacred silence waiting inside. Just before entering the Abbey, Catherine paused briefly and turned back toward the crowd. Her smile was genuine and warm, a moment of connection with the people who had come to witness this day. She raised her hand in a gentle wave, and the crowd responded with renewed enthusiasm. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes about her understanding of the relationship between the royal family and the public. William also turned, his expression serious but not stern. He acknowledged the crowd with a nod, his bearing every inch that of a future king, yet his eyes showed appreciation for the support and affection being offered. Beside him, the children followed their parents' lead, George offering a small wave, Charlotte smiling sweetly, and Louis looking out at the sea of faces with wonder still evident in his expression. The moment stretched, suspended between the public world outside and the private ceremony waiting within. Television cameras zoomed in, capturing every nuance of expression, every small gesture and interaction. Commentators around the world struggled to find words adequate to describe the scene, often falling back on simple statements about the family's obvious bond and the public's clear affection for them. Security personnel maintained their positions, but even they seemed moved by the atmosphere. The professionalism that defined their work did not blind them to the historical significance of what they were witnessing. Some had protected multiple generations of royals and recognized this as one of those moments that would be remembered and discussed for decades to come. Finally, with one last look at the gathered crowd, the family turned together and moved through the Abbey entrance. The massive doors would remain open, allowing glimpses of the interior, but the family was stepping from the very public space outside into the more contained environment within. The transition was symbolic, a movement from the broad embrace of public support into the more intimate space of formal ceremony and family significance. As they crossed the threshold, their figures were silhouetted against the grand interior of the Abbey, an image that would appear on front pages and in history books. The crowd outside, though they could no longer see the family clearly, continued their expressions of support and affection, their voices carrying into the ancient stone building as a reminder of the connection between the monarchy and the people it represented. The interior of Westminster Abbey enveloped the royal family in an atmosphere of reverence and history. The soaring Gothic architecture reached toward heaven, and light filtered through the ancient stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the stone floors. The air inside was cooler than outside, carrying with it the scent of centuries of worship and the subtle fragrance of flowers that had been arranged throughout the sacred space. As William and Catherine walked with their children down the aisle, every eye in the Abbey turned toward them. The guests who had already been seated represented a remarkable gathering of dignitaries, family members, and individuals significant to the occasion. Many smiled warmly at the sight of the children, recognizing the importance of their presence and the continuity they represented. George walked between his parents, his young face showing concentration as he carefully maintained the proper pace and bearing. He had been prepared for this moment, but experiencing it was something entirely different from any rehearsal or briefing. His eyes occasionally flickered to the grandeur around him, taking in details of the Abbey he had heard about but perhaps never fully appreciated until this moment. Charlotte moved with natural grace, her steps confident despite the weight of attention upon her. She had inherited her mother's ability to appear both regal and approachable, a rare combination that had already made her a favorite with the public. Her small hand occasionally brushed against her dress, a subtle gesture that revealed she was still a child, despite the composed exterior she presented to the world. Louis, the youngest, stayed close to his mother, his small hand firmly held in hers. His eyes were wide as he looked up at the vaulted ceiling high above, at the banners hanging in the nave, at the assembled guests who watched their progress. There was an innocence in his wonder that touched hearts, a reminder that behind the titles and the ceremony were real children experiencing something extraordinary. Catherine guided Louis gently, her maternal instincts in full operation. Even as she maintained her own composed appearance, she would occasionally lean down slightly, whispering words of encouragement or pointing out something of interest to help keep him engaged and comfortable. These small interactions, though barely visible to most observers, showed the careful balance she maintained between her royal duties and her role as a mother. William walked with the bearing of someone who had grown up within these traditions, yet his frequent glances toward his children revealed where his heart truly lay. He was participating in a formal occasion, yes, but his primary concern remained his family's well-being. When George looked up at him with a question in his eyes, William responded with a reassuring nod that needed no words to convey its meaning. The family reached their designated seats, positioned in a place of honor that reflected their status, but also allowed them to participate fully in the ceremony. The process of settling into their places was done with practiced efficiency. William ensured each child was properly positioned before taking his own seat. Catherine smoothed her dress and then checked on each child in turn, her movements subtle but thorough. As the ceremony began, the children demonstrated remarkable patience and attention. George sat straight in his seat, his hands folded in his lap in unconscious imitation of his father. He listened intently to the words being spoken, his young face serious as he processed the significance of what he was witnessing. There were moments when his attention might have wandered, but a gentle touch from William or a quiet word from Catherine would bring his focus back. Charlotte displayed an impressive ability to sit still and maintain her composure throughout. She followed along with the ceremony, her eyes moving between the speakers and her parents, taking cues from their reactions about when to stand, sit, or maintain silence. Her education and preparation were evident in how naturally she adapted to each phase of the proceedings. Louis, being younger, required more guidance, but he surprised many with his behavior. There were moments when his energy threatened to overflow, when sitting still became challenging, but Catherine's patient presence beside him worked like magic. She would quietly show him things in the program, point out details in the architecture, or simply hold his hand a bit tighter when he needed that physical connection to stay grounded. The Abbey's acoustics carried every word of the ceremony with crystal clarity, and the solemnity of the occasion seemed to affect even Louis. He watched with curiosity as different parts of the ceremony unfolded, his young mind trying to understand the traditions and meanings behind what he was seeing. When music filled the space, his face lit up with genuine pleasure, the beauty of the sound reaching him in a way that words perhaps could not. There were tender moments throughout that would be remembered by those present. At one point, Charlotte reached over and straightened Louis's collar, a sisterly gesture done so naturally that it drew smiles from nearby observers. George, noticing his younger brother shifting in his seat, quietly slid a hand over to rest on Louis's arm, offering the same kind of stabilizing presence his father provided for him. Catherine and William watched their children with pride that was visible, despite their attempts to maintain formal expressions. Every small success, every moment of proper behavior, every display of sibling support filled them with a quiet joy that needed no words. They were witnessing their children rise to an occasion, showing the world the values and grace they had worked to instill. The ceremony included moments of great emotion, and the family experienced these together. When particularly moving words were spoken, Catherine's eyes glistened slightly and William's jaw tightened with feeling. The children, seeing their parents' reactions, understood that what they were witnessing mattered deeply, even if they could not fully comprehend all the complexities involved. Periodically, guests in the Abbey would glance toward the royal family, drawn by curiosity or affection. What they saw consistently was a picture of unity and mutual support. William's hand would rest on George's shoulder during standing portions, Catherine would lean slightly toward Charlotte, sharing a whispered observation. Louis would look up at his parents and siblings, drawing comfort and guidance from their presence. The lighting in the abbey shifted as the ceremony progressed, the sun moving across the sky and changing how light fell through the stained glass. These subtle changes created an almost ethereal atmosphere, and the children seemed to notice, their faces showing wonder at the play of colors and shadows around them. It was a reminder that despite the formality and significance, they were still young enough to find magic in simple visual beauty. As the ceremony reached its more intense moments, the family's togetherness became even more evident. They were not just seated near each other but were emotionally connected, sharing in the experience as a true family unit. William and Catherine had successfully created an environment where their children could be part of history while still being protected and supported through the experience. The final portions of the ceremony approached, and the children showed signs of fatigue but maintained their composure admirably. George sat up straighter, as if reminding himself of his responsibilities. Charlotte's smile remained gentle but perhaps required more effort to maintain. Louis leaned more heavily against his mother, accepting the comfort she offered while still participating in the moment. Throughout it all, the ancient walls of Westminster Abbey bore witness to yet another chapter in royal history, this one written not just in tradition and ceremony, but in the faces of three children learning what it meant to be part of something larger than themselves, supported every step of the way by parents who loved them deeply. As the ceremony drew toward its conclusion, a sense of completion filled Westminster Abbey. The final prayers were offered, the last hymn sung, and the assembled guests began to prepare for the family's departure. The children, who had maintained such impressive composure throughout, showed subtle signs of relief that the formal portion was ending, though they remained attentive to their parents' guidance about what would come next. William leaned toward George, speaking quietly to prepare him for their exit. George nodded, his face showing he understood the importance of maintaining dignity even as they left the sacred space. He had performed his role admirably, and the slight smile William gave him communicated fatherly pride more effectively than any words could have. George straightened his shoulders, ready for what came next. Catherine gathered Louis close, smoothing his hair and adjusting his clothing one final time before they would face the crowds again. Louis looked up at her with those expressive eyes, and she smiled down at him with pure maternal love. Whatever challenges the day had presented, this moment of connection between mother and son was entirely genuine, untouched by the ceremony and formality surrounding them. Charlotte had already prepared herself, somehow knowing instinctively what would be required. She checked her own appearance with a quick glance downward, adjusted her posture, and took a deep breath. At such a young age, she had already developed an awareness of her role and the expectations that came with it. Yet she still reached for her mother's hand, needing that connection even as she presented a brave face to the world. The moment came for them to rise and begin their processional exit. William stood first, offering his hand to Catherine in a gesture of partnership that had become second nature over their years together. She rose gracefully, and together they helped ensure each child was ready. The family arranged themselves in their proper order, a formation that balanced protocol with family dynamics. As they began to walk back down the aisle, the guests rose in respect. The sound of hundreds of people standing in unison created a rustling wave that followed the family's progress. Faces on either side showed appreciation, respect, and in many cases genuine affection for the family moving past them. Some guests had watched William grow from a boy into a man and now into a father, and their eyes reflected the passage of time and the continuity of tradition. George walked with increasing confidence, perhaps energized by the knowledge that the most difficult part was behind them. His steps were steady, and he even managed to make brief eye contact with some of the guests, acknowledging their presence with small nods that showed his developing understanding of royal duty. He was learning to balance being himself with being a prince, and doing remarkably well at finding that balance. Charlotte's grace seemed to grow with each step. She had that rare quality of making formal occasions look effortless, even when they required significant effort and concentration. Her smile was natural as she passed familiar faces among the guests, and there was a warmth in her expression that made people feel she genuinely appreciated their presence and participation in this important day. Louis, holding tightly to Catherine's hand, navigated the walk with determination. His shorter legs meant he had to work harder to keep pace, but he managed without complaint. Every so often he would look up at his mother for reassurance, and she would squeeze his hand gently or offer a quick smile that told him he was doing perfectly. The bond between them was visible and touching to observe. William maintained his position, aware of every detail around them, but focused primarily on his family's well-being. His protective instincts were balanced with the knowledge that this was also a teaching moment for his children, an opportunity for them to experience and learn from a significant royal occasion. He was both father and future king, and managing both roles simultaneously with such apparent ease was a testament to his own preparation and character. As they approached the Abbey's entrance, the sounds from outside began to filter in more clearly. The crowd had remained throughout the ceremony, their patience and dedication a reminder of the public's investment in the royal family. The cheers and calls of support grew louder with each step the family took toward the exit, building anticipation for the moment when they would emerge once again into public view. The doorway ahead framed a rectangle of bright daylight, a contrast to the cooler, dimmer interior of the Abbey. The family could see the crowds beyond, the press of people eager to see them, to capture photographs, to be part of this moment in history. The children processed this sight differently. George seemed to steel himself for what was coming. Charlotte's expression showed readiness mixed with a hint of excitement. Louis pressed closer to his mother but didn't show fear, just a child's natural caution about facing something large and overwhelming. Catherine took a moment to check on each child one final time before they stepped outside. She adjusted Louis's collar, smoothed Charlotte's hair, and caught George's eye with a look that communicated confidence in him. These small maternal touches grounded the children, reminding them that despite the grandeur and public attention, they were still part of a family that loved and supported them unconditionally. William positioned himself so he could easily guide or support any of his children if needed. His experience with public appearances had taught him to anticipate challenges and be ready to respond smoothly. But as he looked at his children, he felt a surge of pride at how well they had managed the day so far. They had been prepared, yes, but their natural grace and adaptability were shining through in ways that preparation alone could not account for. The Abbey officials waited near the entrance, ready to bid the family farewell with appropriate ceremony. Their faces showed respect and perhaps a touch of personal warmth. They had witnessed many royal occasions within these walls, but there was something particularly moving about seeing a young family navigate such an important day, with obvious love and unity binding them together. The family paused briefly at the threshold, a last moment of relative privacy. Before stepping back into the full glare of public attention, they stood together, William and Catherine flanking their children, a unit facing the world. The light from outside illuminated them, creating an almost ethereal effect that would be captured by the cameras waiting beyond. In that pause, barely lasting seconds but feeling longer, the family shared unspoken communication. Eyes met, small smiles were exchanged, hands squeezed hands. They were ready to face the crowd again, ready to complete this day's duties, but most importantly, they were ready to do it together. The children drew strength from their parents, and William and Catherine drew inspiration from their children's bravery and poise. The noise from outside swelled, a wave of human sound that represented thousands of voices united in support and affection. The family could hear their names being called, could sense the energy and excitement waiting for them. This was the moment when private ceremony would transition back to public celebration, when the intimate family experience would be shared once again with the nation and the world. William took the first step forward, and the family followed, moving as one toward the doorway and the crowds beyond. The ancient stones of Westminster Abbey watched them go, these walls that had witnessed so much history now adding another chapter. The family emerged from shadow into light, from the sacred space into the public sphere, carrying with them the dignity and love that had characterized their entire appearance. The moment the royal family stepped through the Abbey doors into the daylight, the crowd's reaction was thunderous. Thousands of voices rose in cheers, creating a sound that seemed to shake the very air around Westminster. The family paused at the top of the steps, allowing the public this moment of celebration and connection. The sight that greeted them was breathtaking, a sea of people extending far beyond what the eye could easily comprehend. All gathered to witness this moment. Catherine's face lit up with a genuine smile as she surveyed the crowd. She had always understood the importance of these public moments. the way they allowed ordinary people to feel connected to the royal family. Her wave was graceful and warm, acknowledging different sections of the crowd with turns of her body and direct eye contact that made individuals feel personally recognized, even from a distance. William stood beside her, his hand occasionally touching the small of her back in a gesture of support and partnership. His own acknowledgement of the crowd was more reserved but no less sincere. He understood the responsibility of the moment, the way their family's presence here represented continuity, tradition, and hope for the future. His children stood as living proof of that future, and he was acutely aware of the symbolic weight they carried. George emerged more fully into the public eye, and the crowd's response to him was particularly enthusiastic. Many had watched him grow from a baby into this composed young man, and there was a collective pride in seeing how well he was handling the moment. He offered a small wave, his gesture dignified but friendly. His face showed concentration as he remembered the guidance he had received about proper public behavior. But there was also something natural and genuine in how he interacted with the moment. Charlotte stepped forward, and cameras clicked frantically to capture her appearance. Her dress caught the light beautifully, and her smile was radiant. She seemed to understand instinctively how to engage with the crowd, offering waves and smiles that felt personal, despite the vast number of people present. There was a grace in her movement and expression that reminded many observers of the late Princess Diana, though Charlotte was very much her own person with her own developing style. Louis, initially overwhelmed by the noise and the sight of so many people, stayed close to his mother. Catherine's hand remained on his shoulder, a steady presence that allowed him to process the experience at his own pace. Gradually, as he grew more comfortable, he began to wave tentatively at the crowd. His small gestures triggered disproportionate responses of affection from the public, who found his mixture of shyness and courage absolutely endearing. The family began their descent down the Abbey steps, moving carefully but with confidence. The red carpet beneath their feet provided a literal path, but they were also navigating the more complex pathway of public duty and family unity. Each step was photographed, each expression analyzed by the cameras documenting every second of their appearance. Yet somehow the family managed to seem natural and unforced despite the intense scrutiny. At the bottom of the steps, something unexpected and wonderful happened. William made a decision to pause and approach the barriers where people had been waiting for hours. This was not strictly part of the planned schedule, but it was the kind of spontaneous gesture that created meaningful connections between the royals and the public. Catherine immediately understood and supported the decision, bringing the children along as they moved toward the waiting crowd. The people pressed against the barriers erupted in excitement as the family approached. Hands reached out, not grabbing or demanding, but offering, hoping for a moment of connection. William began to shake hands, exchange brief words, accept flowers and small gifts offered with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes. His interactions were quick but genuine, each person receiving a moment of his full attention before he moved to the next. Catherine engaged with equal warmth, bending down to speak with children in the crowd, accepting bouquets with gracious thanks, listening intently when someone took their precious seconds to share a message. Her ability to make each interaction feel special and personal was remarkable. People would later describe how she looked directly into their eyes, how her smile seemed meant just for them, how she made them feel seen and valued. George followed his father's example, shaking hands with careful formality, but also with growing confidence. Some in the crowd called out encouragement to him, told him he was doing wonderfully, and he responded with shy smiles and polite thanks. He was learning in real time how to balance accessibility with appropriate dignity, and the public's warm response to his efforts gave him visible boosts of confidence. Charlotte's interactions with the crowd were particularly touching. She gravitated toward the children who had been brought by their parents, offering them special attention and sweet smiles. When one little girl thrust forward a small bouquet of flowers, Charlotte accepted them with such genuine delight that the moment brought tears to many observers' eyes. She seemed to understand that for these children, this interaction would become a treasured memory. Louis, still holding his mother's hand, was more reserved in his interactions but no less endearing. When people called his name, he would wave, sometimes hide his face against his mother's side in shyness, then peek out and wave again. His natural personality shone through, and the public adored him for being so genuine and unrehearsed. Catherine never pushed him beyond his comfort zone but gently encouraged him to engage when he seemed ready. The family's security team worked efficiently around them, maintaining necessary safety protocols while allowing these precious interactions to occur. They were professionals who understood the importance of these moments, who had learned to create space for human connection while remaining vigilant. Their presence was necessary, but as unobtrusive as possible, allowing the focus to remain on the family and the people who had come to see them. Time seemed to slow and speed up simultaneously. Each interaction lasted only seconds, but those seconds were packed with meaning and emotion. An elderly woman told William that she had waited to see his mother at the same location decades ago, and now here she was seeing him with his own children. Her voice cracked with emotion, and William's response, though necessarily brief, was filled with understanding and appreciation for that continuity of loyalty and affection. A young man told Catherine that meeting her was the highlight of his life, that he had admired her for years, and her warm thanks and genuine smile made his hands shake with excitement. A child gave Charlotte a drawing that had clearly taken hours to create, and Charlotte's careful acceptance and promise to treasure it was a moment that would be retold in that family for generations. The gifts that were offered ranged from elaborate to simple, but each was accepted with equal grace. Flowers, drawings, small tokens, letters, and cards all made their way into the hands of family members or the waiting staff. Each represented someone's desire to contribute to this moment, to give something back to a family that, through their public service, had given so much to the nation. As the family continued along the barrier, the sun moved across the sky, changing the quality of light and creating different shadows and highlights. Photographers adjusted their positions constantly, seeking the perfect shot that would capture not just the visual beauty of the moment, but its emotional resonance. The expressions on the faces in the crowd told stories of joy, pride, connection, and sometimes overwhelming emotion at being so close to people they had followed and cared about for years. Eventually, the schedule required them to move on. There were many more people along the barriers than they could possibly greet individually, and this reality was bittersweet for everyone involved. William and Catherine began to guide their children back toward the waiting vehicles, though they continued to wave and acknowledge the crowd as they moved. The cheers followed them, a sustained expression of affection and support that seemed to physically embrace the family. The walk back to the waiting vehicles felt different than their arrival. Where there had been nervous anticipation before, now there was a sense of accomplishment and shared experience. The children walked with visible relief that they had successfully navigated such an important day, but also with something new in their bearing. A quiet confidence that came from rising to a challenge and meeting it well. George's steps were lighter, his shoulders relaxed in a way they had not been that morning. He had proven to himself that he could handle the weight of public expectation, could represent his family with dignity and grace. William noticed this change in his son and felt his heart swell with fatherly pride. A few quiet words passed between them, just for the two of them, acknowledgement of a significant milestone in George's young life. Charlotte practically glowed with the success of the day. She had navigated every aspect with remarkable poise, and the positive response from the crowd had clearly touched her. She chattered softly to her mother about the people they had met, the things people had said, the gifts they had received. Catherine listened with full attention, responding to her daughter's excitement while also using the moment to reinforce important lessons about public service and the privilege of their position. Louis was tired, the emotional and physical demands of the day catching up with his younger frame. He leaned against his mother as they walked, and she adjusted her pace to accommodate his fatigue, without making it obvious or causing him any embarrassment. The love between them was palpable, a bond that transcended royal duty and existed simply because of who they were to each other, mother and child. As they reached the vehicles, the family paused for one final acknowledgement of the crowd. This was the last moment they would be visible before departing, and everyone seemed to recognize its significance. William and Catherine stood with their children arrayed before them, a final tableau that cameras captured from every possible angle. They waved together, a family united in their public role but also clearly unified by personal bonds of love and mutual support. The crowd's response was overwhelming. Cheers mixed with calls of "We love you" and "Thank you." People waved flags with such enthusiasm that the air seemed filled with moving color. The emotional energy was intense, Years of loyalty and affection concentrated into these final seconds of visibility. Some in the crowd were crying openly, moved by the beauty of the moment and the connection they felt to this family, who represented so much to so many. Catherine's eyes scanned the crowd one last time, and her expression showed genuine gratitude. She understood that these people had given their time, their energy, their emotional investment to be present for this day. Their presence was a gift, one that she and William had learned never to take for granted. She raised her hand in a final wave, her smile warm and inclusive, trying somehow to acknowledge every single person present. William's final gesture was more subtle, but equally meaningful. He placed his hand over his heart briefly, a silent communication of appreciation and respect for the public's continued support. It was a simple motion that many might have missed, but those who caught it understood its significance. He was showing them that their presence mattered, that they mattered to him and his family. The moment came to enter the vehicles. Staff moved forward to assist, doors were opened, and the transition began from public to private. George climbed in first, followed by Charlotte, who helped Louis settle into his seat with the same care she had shown throughout the day. These small acts of sibling support and care were perhaps the most touching aspects of the entire event. Proof that despite their unique circumstances, they were children who loved and looked after each other. Catherine took her seat, arranging her outfit carefully and ensuring the children were all comfortable. Her mothering instincts did not turn off just because they were moving from public view. She checked seatbelts, smoothed hair, offered water bottles to thirsty children who had been so focused on proper behavior that they had not thought to ask for drinks earlier. These practical acts of care grounded everyone, bringing them back from the grand ceremony to the simpler reality of family life. William was the last to enter, taking one final glance at the scene outside before the door closed. He saw the crowd still cheering, still waving, still present in this moment with his family. He saw the ancient facade of Westminster Abbey, witness to so much history and now to this day that would be remembered as a significant moment in his children's development in public life. He saw his wife and children safe and successful, and something in him relaxed knowing they had all come through this together. The vehicle doors closed, muffling the sound from outside but not eliminating it entirely. Inside, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The formal masks could come down, at least partially. Louis immediately kicked off his shoes with a sigh of relief that made everyone laugh. Charlotte giggled, her own feet undoubtedly feeling the same constraint. George loosened his tie just slightly, looking to his father for permission, which William granted with an understanding nod and a smile. As the convoy began to move, pulling away from Westminster Abbey and the gathered crowds, the family settled into their seats with visible exhaustion but also satisfaction. They had done what was required of them, had represented their family and the monarchy with dignity, had shown the public a face of unity and grace. Now, in the private space of the vehicle, they could simply be a family processing an extraordinary experience together. Catherine reached across to hold William's hand, and their eyes met in a moment of shared understanding. They had guided their children through a significant milestone, had protected them while also allowing them to shine. The balance had been difficult to strike, but looking at their 3 children now, tired but happy, clearly proud of themselves but not arrogant, they knew they had done well. The streets of London passed by outside the windows, and gradually the crowds thinned as they moved away from the Abbey. The children watched the city go by, pointing out familiar landmarks, returning to a more normal state of being. Their conversation was punctuated with comments about the day, moments they wanted to remember, people who had made an impression on them. George talked about a man who had told him he would make a fine king one day, and how that had made him feel both proud and slightly overwhelmed by the responsibility implied in those words. William listened carefully, using this moment to talk with his son about duty, service, and the importance of staying grounded and true to oneself, even while carrying great responsibilities. Charlotte described a little girl who had given her a flower and told her she was pretty like a princess should be. Catherine used this to gently discuss appearance versus character, the importance of being kind and good rather than simply beautiful, lessons that Charlotte absorbed with her characteristic thoughtfulness. These teaching moments were woven naturally into the conversation, part of how William and Catherine had always chosen to parent. Louis was quieter, processing the day in his own way. Catherine kept him close, knowing that while he had done wonderfully, he was also the most likely to feel overwhelmed by the experience. She spoke softly to him about brave he had been, how proud she was of him, reinforcing positive memories of the day to help him understand it as a success rather than an ordeal. As Kensington Palace came into view, there was a collective sense of homecoming. This was their private space where they could fully relax and return to their family life away from public eyes. The day had been significant and successful, but now it was time to rest, to reflect privately, to be simply William, Catherine, George, Charlotte, and Louis without the weight of titles and public expectation. The vehicles pulled through the palace gates, and the family prepared to disembark into their private residence. They had captivated hearts, had shown the world a beautiful example of family unity and royal duty well executed. But perhaps more importantly, they had shown their children that they could handle significant responsibilities while remaining true to themselves, supported always by parents who loved them unconditionally. As they stepped out of the vehicles and headed inside, they carried with them the memories of an extraordinary day and the knowledge that they had faced it together, as a family, and had emerged stronger for the experience.